Hi everyone, welcome to the Responding to Student Writing Workshop. My name is Molly Hartzog-Storment. I'm a PhD student in Communication, Rhetoric, and Digital Media at NC State. I've also just completed my Master's in Rhetoric and Composition, also at State. And during that time, I participated in the COAT program and also worked as the COAT graduate assistant. At this point in the workshop, you should have completed steps 1 and 2, a discussion forum and a practice activity. If you have not already done so, please pause this video and return to these steps. In this portion of the workshop, I will give you an overview of different commenting styles and strategies. We'll look at some examples of different types of comments, as well as an example of what not to do on your students' papers. I was inspired to put this workshop together after working as a tutor in a writing center. I was surprised at how often students would bring in graded papers with their instructor's feedback, usually for one of two reasons. Either they were being given a chance to revise that paper and wanted to make sure they addressed all their instructor's comments, or they were working on a new assignment and wanted to make sure that they did not repeat the same mistakes. So, based on my experience as a tutor, your students do read your feedback. However, very often I had to work with students who were quite frustrated with their instructor's comments. For example, a student would come in with a paper that had a word circled with word choice written above it. And they would say, "I don't understand what's wrong with that word." Or with a phrase underlined that said "awkward" above it. And the student would say, "I don't understand what's so awkward about that." So we had to work together in order to interpret what their instructor meant when they wrote word choice and awkward in these certain places. So let me show you a typical example of what I might have seen with one of my students in the Writing Center. Pause this video for just a moment and jot down a few notes about your initial reaction to this paper. One of the first things I notice is that there are a lot of comments here, an overwhelming amount. When you grade papers, one of my favorite tips to give TAs is to pick your battles. Before making any marks on the paper, decide if you're going to tackle lower level issues like grammar and style, or more global issues like structure and content. I know many writing instructors that don't even make a single comment on papers before they read through it once in its entirety, and then they go back and decide what they're going to focus on in their comments. This strategy may or may not work for you, but you should still be deliberate and thoughtful with what you write. If for no other reason than after grading 30 or so papers like this, you will have a major hand cramp. Some other things I noticed right away is this instructor has made many small comments pertaining to word choice, grammar, and style. Then this instructor bracketed the entire paragraph and wrote, "You need to do more research" in the left margin, and "this paragraph needs to be expanded in order to be more interesting to a reader" on the right. These comments send mixed messages. The fact that the instructor made so many low-level corrections indicates that, on the one hand, all that's left to do is some cleaning up. But then, the two comments in the margin indicate the paragraph needs to be rewritten entirely. This goes back to my tip earlier of pick your battles. Take a top-down approach when assessing student writing. In the Writing Center, we called this approach essay triage. You first look at the major issues of the paper. Do they have a clear thesis? Do they have good structure, a good organization? And then, when all of those things check out, then we look at grammar, style, punctuation, and so on. You may or may not be guilty of commenting like this on your students' papers, but many well-intentioned instructors have fallen into this trap, thinking more is better. The more feedback I give my students, the better writers they'll become. But as I've already implied, this is not necessarily the best approach. You don't want to bombard your students, overwhelming them with information. Rather, you want to provide them with a game plan for revision. After reading your comments, they should have a good sense of the next steps they need to take to improve their paper. Now let's move on. On the Moodle site, for this workshop, you'll find a Word file of a rubric designed to help you assess your comments on your students' papers. If you've not already done so, I would recommend downloading this rubric and having it handy as we go through the next portion of this video. On this rubric, you'll see there are two elements of all comments: focus and mode. Focus is the particular element of writing you are addressing in your comment. This can be a particular word, a sentence, an issue in the paper as a whole, the thesis statement, and so on. The mode is the way the comment is stated. I kind of like to think of it as the genre of a comment. So let's start with focus. There are 5 different types of foci listed down the left-hand side of your rubric. These are correctness, style, organization, content, and context. Correctness is anything viewed in terms of right and wrong. Okay, this is grammar, spelling, punctuation, anything where you see a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something. Style has to do with wording and structure. This is word choice, awkwardness, the way a particular sentence is written. Organization is the overall arrangement of a paragraph and the overall arrangement of paragraphs within the paper as a whole. Content is pretty straightforward. This is the argument, examples, data, analysis, anything that has to do with the topic of the paper. Context references things outside of the text. This could be the assignment sheet, class lectures, audience, your purpose, the student's previous drafts, and so on. Now moving on to mode. Mode, as I mentioned, is the way a particular comment is written. There are 4 different modes: corrective, directive, facilitative, and evaluative. Now when I talk about the 4 different types of comments, this is what I'm really referring to. Focus is really important in terms of what you value as an instructor. Do you value grammar, style, organization, content, or context? Mode has huge implications to the extent to which your student will really reflect on your comments and really make deliberate decisions in terms of their writing. So going through each of these, corrective mode explicitly corrects the student's text. This is inserting words, crossing out words, inserting punctuation, adding entire sentences, rewriting entire sentences, and so on. Directive is similar to corrective, but it tells the student how to fix problems rather than doing it yourself. Facilitative comments are usually framed as questions. They do not offer a direct solution, but they strongly insinuate revision is needed. Evaluative comments are anything that is judgmental. These are end comments, the actual grade, and also any comments that deal with large chunks of the text. Now let's go back to our sample paper from earlier and look at some examples. I'll be moving through several examples here and identifying the focus and mode of each. If you would like a little practice on your own, you can pause this video with each example and write down what you think the focus and mode is before I discuss it. First, let's look at this top one here. Wordy, be precise. The focus of this comment is on style, since it's focusing on a portion of a sentence and the way in which it is written. Wordiness is not something we view in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of better and worse. The mode of this comment is directive. The instructor did not explicitly rewrite this phrase for the student, but gave direct instructions to do so. Let's take a look at this next one. Spelling, with an arrow pointing down to the word pageantry. And yes, pageantry is actually spelled correct here, so let this serve as a teaching moment to you. If you're going to make corrective comments, make sure you are 100% right in your correction. The focus of this comment is correctness, since spelling is an issue that is generally seen as right and wrong. There is only one way to spell the word pageantry. The mode here is directive again, since the instructor did not correct the error herself, but is directing the student to do so. Be specific. What reasons? The focus of this comment is on content, since the instructor is wanting more information. The mode of this comment is facilitative. The giveaway is that it is framed as a question. The instructor here is wanting the student to think about the details of this information rather than providing any details herself. This comment, which reads "and why" with that crossed out, is focusing again on style. This instructor may have a particular grammar rule in mind by making this change, but from my perspective, using that seems to make as much sense as "and why." So to me, this is a question of word choice and better versus worse rather than a right or wrong. So again, it is an issue of style. The mode of this comment is corrective, since the instructor is directly changing the words herself. This side comment reads, "This paragraph needs to be expanded in order to be more interesting to a reader." The focus of this comment is context. The key word here is reader. The instructor is concerned with the audience, something that exists outside of the text. The mode of this comment is evaluative, since it is referring to a large chunk of the text, the entire paragraph. So I continued analyzing all these comments and mapped them out on this rubric for you. There were 14 comments total. In the next activity, you'll return to your comments in Susan's medical school application and map out your comments in the same way. It may be easiest for you to go through each comment individually and put a mark on the rubric where you think it belongs. I went ahead and added up the numbers together so we can get a good picture of the type of comments that our instructor used here. So what does this tell us? The first thing you may notice is this instructor uses mostly directive comments and focuses mostly on style and content. If this instructor believes organization and context are the most important elements of writing, then she may be quite surprised with this rubric. As I mentioned earlier, your choice in mode is what will really determine how your students respond to your response, how much they'll reflect on their writing versus just going through the motions of correcting what you marked and just doing what you want. This instructor used mostly directive comments, which directly tells the students how to revise. To me, overuse of directive comments is a problem. In my teaching philosophy, I believe in giving students complete ownership over their writing. Making large amounts of directive comments where I explicitly tell the student how to revise their paper goes against this philosophy, because I am imposing my writing onto theirs rather than encouraging them to revise their own. Using facilitative comments and framing your advice as questions to consider rather than corrections to be made guide your students through rethinking why they made certain choices in their writing. In addition, using facilitative comments takes away the assumption that you know what the student meant to write. I very often learned this the hard way in tutoring when I would assume I knew what the student meant to write, make a suggestion on how to improve it, and then the student quickly gets frustrated because he knows that's not what he meant to say. One more comment on your choice of mode. While obviously I value facilitative comments because of my specific teaching philosophy, you may decide that you value other types of comments more based on the goals of your course. The first time I offered this workshop in person, a TA in engineering told me his students would get really frustrated if all he ever used was facilitative and evaluative comments. They would just want to know how to fix it and how to do it right. In my discipline, writing assignments are usually creative in nature, and we very much encourage originality and critical thinking. In other disciplines, this may not be the case. For example, if you teach a physics lab, there may be only so many experiments you can do and only so many ways to write this particular lab report, and so therefore directive comments may be a little bit more valuable to you. The important part is you want to make sure that your students have a clear idea of what went wrong in their writing and have a game plan to move forward with revision. In the next activity, you will be returning to your comments on Susan's medical school application and mapping them out on this rubric. When you are finished, you will write a short reflection on your comments and post it to the second discussion forum. After you have mapped out all your comments, think about your values in writing that you discussed in the first forum. How well are your values actually reflected in your comments? What mode do you generally use in your comments, and do you think this will be helpful for Susan when she revises her application?